say about truth to self. Seeing right, living right, responding in truth to the world in which we live in. Just that it might be our greatest challenge. Now, I've got a couple verses here. Eric just got here. I'm not sure if he has enough time. Eric, do you have any of those ready? Okay, give me James 1. And we're going to just try to go through these. I want you to see how many there are. I said I was going to stand here. That's probably not true. But be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving ourselves. 1 Corinthians 3:18. Let no man deceive himself. It's just crazy to me that it's possible that we would want to, that we would live deceiving ourselves. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, if we've spent our time in this world, if we come together and let's say, Brooks, let's say we come together, let's say you and Ben get together and say, let's figure out how we're going to raise these children. Well, you know, if any man seemeth to be wise in this world and wants to make these decisions based off of what they have up here or what they have in here, it would tell us, let them become a fool. Because we can't figure these things out. God's revealed these things to us. That's truth. If we're trying to figure out life ourselves, then if we're getting together and the two of us, we throw all of our smarts into a pile. That's a small pile. We're not going to come up with a whole lot of truth. In fact, we need to be foolish in what we can come up with and what we can decide. And in that way, when we become dependent, we become wise. Romans 1.
You haven't gotten there yet? Oof. Professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. How about 2 Corinthians 10? It is too. All right, we'll stay right there. But it's not 6:18. It's 6:3. All right, well, 6:3 says, for if any man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. There you go. 2 Corinthians? 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12. I like this verse. For we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves. And that's where we really get in trouble. Brother Maury, that's where we get in trouble, when we start comparing ourselves to others. This is what happens. If I want to look wise, I compare myself right over there to our music director. It's a good policy, right? But it tells us we should not dare to make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. It is foolish to determine value based on here. Proverbs 14:8. Oh, that's pretty fast. His fingers are getting good, huh? But the wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way. By the way, that's the opposite of self-deceived. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand who he is and why he is and what he's doing and what he was trying to accomplish and what his desires are. It's not to do the switch and mirrors. It's not to do the control. It's not to do the deception. But the folly of fools is to deceive. Now, that's talking about our own understanding. The folly of fools is to deceive themselves. Proverbs 21:2. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, and there's the problem. There's a problem. If I'm making the decision absent truth, it makes sense to me. It's the only reason I decide to do it. That does not make it truth. I can convince myself, and I'll just, here might be the single biggest challenge for young Christians, for teens, because this is how they want to decide everything. Well, Brother Jeremy, I had peace about it. Well, of course I had peace about it. It's right in my own eyes. It's what I think I should be doing. But it's absent of truth. The Bible has a lot to say about self-deception. If we were going to spend some time in here, and if we were going to stay here for a while, Doug, we'd go to two great illustrations. I think the Bible gives us two living illustrations of the danger of self-deception. One is Saul. Saul was told to go and to kill all the Amalekites and to destroy and to take no spoils. Well, when Samuel shows up, Saul isn't nervous at all. In fact, he runs out to meet him. He's ready to brag. You know the first thing he says out of his mouth? I have done all that you said. Wrong. In fact, let me tell you my idea that's better than what you told me to do, is we're going to do this, and we have this. And the king I've saved alive, you know I saved the king alive. You know, if you go back, say, from the Middle Ages on, the rulers, those in charge, they almost never died. Just in, regular soldiers, you and I, we're dead like that. But the rulers, they didn't kill them because they could ransom them back for money. How much do you think the Amalekites would pay to get their king back? So he's bragging about how much better he did. He's self-deceived in the whole thing. Nowhere in there is there confession, is there sorrow, is there... Until after Samuel points his finger in his face and says, this is what God told me to do. Then it wasn't me, it was them. Shifting shadows, pointing fingers, deception, blame. I'll tell you another one. And this is probably my favorite. Because I just like looking at, you want to talk about a person to study, don't live life this way. Well, go take a look at Ahab. In the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, they were getting ready to get together, and they were going to go fight against the king of Syria. And, the Jehoshaphat said, well, let's ask and see what God says if we should do this or not. And so he says, I'm gonna call for a prophet. And Ahab right away says, well, I got a bunch of them right here. Let's just talk to these. I've already done it. All of these guys said it's a good idea. Let's go. No. I'm gonna call for a prophet of God. And he says, no, you shouldn't go. Ahab just doesn't want to believe him. He doesn't want to base his life on the word of God. And so you know what he says? He starts coming up with this. Well, you just have it in for me. You're just always mean to me. You just hate me. You're just unfair. And they go to war, and Ahab dies. But before that, Justin, before they go, Ahab says, I'm going to outsmart God. First he says, I don't believe this prophet. But then you know what he does? He dresses in costume. He doesn't dress like the king. He dresses like a normal soldier, because now no one will know to get me. Well, Bruce, if he didn't believe God, then that's the dumbest thing in the whole wide world. Why is he doing that? It actually makes it more likely for him to die. Because he did believe, but he didn't believe because he was deceived. But my absolute favorite passage of dealing with this is 1 John. I don't think maybe I did. Look at that. 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. This then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you. And here's where it all boils down to. Here's where it all starts. God is light. And in him is no darkness at all. None. Zero. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. Now, to bring this up to where we've been talking the last 2 weeks, that would be this, Brother Hank. If we say that we're in fellowship with him, but in darkness, in other words, the way of our life is to pretend, it's to blame, it's to shift, it's to ignore, it's to attack, we lie, and we are not in fellowship with him. And it is so easy to get stuck into this blaming, shifting, dark way of thinking where we don't see reality. I'll give you an illustration. We've got a technician at work, and Brother Moyer, the poor guy's going through a very ugly divorce. I don't know if you can have a not ugly divorce, but this is definitely on the ugly side. He's going through an ugly divorce. He was only married about 5.5 years. And for the last, 2.5, 3 months, every time he's coming through there, he's talking to somebody, whether it's one of my guys, whether it's another one of the technicians. And Justin, it's just, I just don't understand. This is what I keep hearing. I keep hearing him say, I just don't understand. She thinks I don't love her. I love her, and I can't live without her. And it just gets on and on and on. And there's been all kinds of craziness, and police called and chased away. And I mean, it's an ugly divorce. Well, this last week, so he's over there and he's talking, and one of the sales guys is over there. One of the sales guys is complaining about having to spend $300 on a bar tab. Now, I don't know if $300 on a bar tab is a lot of money or not. I mean, I don't. To me, $300 on a bar tab is a reason enough to quit drinking. But he was complaining about spending $300 on a bar tab, and this technician, trying to mock him, preacher, he says, $300 on a bar tab, that's nothing. I spent $300 every month on pot. I spent $300 on beer, and I drink that at home. I spend $200, probably just gambling. $300 on a bar tab on your money, and you're complaining? Justin, this is why I'm not always liked very well. Because I couldn't help myself. You add that up, and that's almost $10,000 a year. If those numbers are correct, which they're probably low, I don't know. I don't know. I wanted to figure this out, but preacher, I don't know how you go ask somebody and say, based off your experience, is $300 on pot a lot? It's just kind of an awkward question to ask. So I didn't know where to find out if he was being truthful or not. But Justin, it's almost $10,000 a year. Now, he's been married for a little over 5 years. So when I pointed out the fact that maybe the reason she doubts your love and commitment for her is because you spent $50,000 on these things, and she still doesn't have a house. It seems pretty simple from the outside, but it didn't seem simple to him at all. In fact, it's a good thing he didn't work on my department because things might have gone very bad. But I'm really tight with his boss, so it's fine. We can deceive ourselves to such a point that we really are incapable of seeing truth. And again, deceiving self, the very thought of it is strange. See, because, here you go. If I thought, that would be a good thing, but if I thought particularly that you were trying to manipulate me, Miss Lorraine, if I thought you were trying to deceive me, I would put my guard up. I could protect myself to a certain extent. Let me tell you, everything you said to me would get questioned. And I know you would do the smoke and mirror, so I would answer the question. You would give me something else. I wouldn't believe that either. I'd ask another question. This would be a very futile conversation in which you would just quit. I could protect myself if I thought it was somebody out here. But Justin, when I'm deceiving myself, there's no more protection. From a book, Not the Way It's Supposed to Be. Self-deception is a shadowy phenomenon by which we pull the wool over some part of our own psyche. We put a move on ourselves. We deny, suppress, or minimize what we know to be true. We assert, adorn, and elevate what we know to be false. We prettify ugly realities and sell ourselves the prettified version. We become our own dupes, playing both the role of the perpetrator and the victim. I mean, we are deceiving self. We know the truth, and yet we do not know it, because we persuade ourselves of its opposite. We actually forget that certain things are wrong. And this is what we actually fit. We actually forget that certain things are wrong and that we have done them. I don't know why my parents are kicking me out. I don't know why the car broke down. I don't know why we haven't. We forget what we have done. We conveniently block it out. To the extent that we are self-deceived, we occupy a twilight zone in which we make up reality as we go along. And in that reality, let me tell you, we're always the good guy. You know, I've been in church a long time. You don't know how many times I hear people, I just want to thank God that he's forgiven my sin. I'm a sin. I sin every day. Like it's some big announcement of confession, and now everybody else has to carry it because I plan on continuing to do exactly the same thing with no change and no pain and no guilt and no... You know, there's deceived confession. You say, well, To the extent that we are self-deceived, we occupy a twilight zone in which we make up reality as we go along. A twilight zone in which the shortest distance between 2 points is actually a labyrinth. We never get there. We just stay spinning in the same cycle again and again and again. You say, well, Jeremy, I think you're kind of stretching that. Well, let me just ask you a couple questions. A moment reflection, comes from the same quote, reminds us that self-deception has long been a growth industry. Why do alcoholics and other drug users typically go through years of self-denial? And even after they come to a place of, I want change, as soon as they relapse, they now deny that they ever denied or that they needed to deny. Why is the revelation of incest inside a home always an astonishment to everyone? I mean, that's scary. You honestly believe that there was never any clue. Well, how did the Nazis convince themselves that their murdering practice was in the best interest of not just the society, but even their victims? Read it. Read anything. That's what well, how could this happen? That's how it happened. They convinced themselves that they were doing the best, even for those they were murdering. Why do battering husbands often minimize the accounts of the beatings they administer? And why do the battered wives sometimes accept and repeat those accounts? We can get to the place where we are so self-deceived. It's not even a fight with truth anymore. I would like to add this. Why do many so-called Christians, so-called followers of Christ, look and act so unlike our Savior? See, Brother Moyer, it's easy when we're talking about those other things. Actually, I was about to say, it's easy when we're talking about incest or the Nazis or battered. None of that's easy. It exists because of the absence of truth. Because our ability to deceive ourselves. When a man is beating his kids, abusing his children, he convinces himself this is what they need for their best interest. That's why he doesn't change. That's why he doesn't stop. The danger of self-deception. But when you get to Christians, why do we look so unlike our Savior? The answer is in this passage. I tried. At least part. Well, Jesus answers it for us in John 3. At least part is because men love darkness rather than light. It is, we are tempted to stay in to the darkness. You see, the darkness is a good place to hide. Brother Hank, in the darkness, I don't have to see my activities. I don't have to look at my deeds. I do not have to acknowledge them. I don't have to deal with them. And if I just stay in the dark long enough and I deal with it well enough, I can learn to deceive myself. Which is why we have so many verses talking about, my little children, don't be deceived. Here, I'll give you another illustration. See, try to find illustrations, because that way no one says you're talking about me. Because I'll be... Preacher, one of the things I've been here a long time now, so one of the things I've heard you say often is, I really just hate it when you lie. Lying is so destructive. Now, most of the time when you're saying that, it's on a relational level. Unlying, I mean, how can you have a relationship if you don't know me, if I don't you? It's false. You can't have a relationship. It is so destructive. But how destructive is it when we lie to ourselves? In a book called Vital Lies and Simple Truths, it's by Daniel Goleman, and it's written about the Watergate trials. He tells the story of John Dean, who was Nixon's counsel, a key point in the Watergate. He's the one who testified. He's the first one who testified in front of the Senate Judicial Committee. And this is taken from that book. Dean's testimony before the Senate Judicial Committee was lengthy, articulate, and remarkably detailed. Indeed, he amazed the committee members with his ability to precisely recount who said what and to remember it in verbatim, and to do this after many, many months. But when the Watergate tapes, which were finally played for the committee, when Watergate tapes, which were finally played for the committee, Dean's testimony turned out to be mostly wishful memory. Like many of us, Dean had remembered things that didn't actually happen. Not surprisingly, most of his mistakes and distortions of recall had the effect of placing him in a much better and more favorable light than the one in which he actually stood. Goldman goes on to say that he doesn't even believe that Dean realized he was lying. He had deceived himself to the point that he actually thought these things happened. Now, why does he make that conclusion? Because the tapes were known and they were going to be played. It was going to be heard. But Hank, that is key to human nature. He got to the place where he believed his dreams were actually reality. But here's the problem. God doesn't live in our dreams. God is light. And in him is no shadow, no pretense, just truth, just reality. So if we're saying we're following and fellowshipping with him, but we're hiding and shifting and denying and attacking, Justin, we might be saved, but we are not in fellowship with the light, because the light chases the darkness away. 1 John, we lie and do not the truth. If we come into the light, one of the most wonderful things the light does is reveal. And what does it reveal? It reveals our stuff. So the question really is do we prefer the light or do we prefer the dark? What do we want to choose? Because we get to choose every day. Josh, one way we get to choose is by what do we do with our time? Last week, do we pay the cost to grow in truth? What do we do with our time? The question is this: do I want to live in the light to see what is true about my life and my attitudes and my character and my relationships and my behavior, my selfishness, my sin? Or do I prefer the dark, to not see the truth? Do I prefer reality or delusion? We all know someone who we look at. We all know someone who we would look at and say, they just don't live in reality. It'd be like, they just don't have a clue. All their dots don't connect. They really can't see what they're doing to their wife or their kids or their self or their husbands. I know people just like that. Yeah. When you start to talk about it, and Rob, I wish Jessica was here because I'm going to use her as an illustration. When you start to talk about this, just not living in reality, there is a level where it's kind of fun. And I'll use Jessica. Jessica Freeze, but she worked for me before she was Jessica Freeze. And everybody who worked in Tampa, all of my employees, which at that time was about 40, who worked in Tampa, they just loved dealing with Jessica. Because Jessica was just so positive about everything. She worked at one of the toughest law firms we had at that point, because there was all kinds of backbiting and struggle and stuff going on in there. And the boss was being attacked by the second boss, and the attorneys didn't get along, and they ended up firing a bunch of paralegals. But during the time she was there, it was just chaos. And Heather, she would call me sometimes, and she'd say, Jeremy, you got a minute? Can you take my call? Yes, Jessica, I took your call. Well, so-and-so wants such and such and such and such. And she would just start going through this long list. And preacher, to me, I'm thinking, why and what and how? And I begin to ask her the first question. She's like, oh, never mind, I'll just do it. You work with her, it just says, people used downtown, they used to say, you know, Jessica, this is how they would describe it. Jessica, problems come, and she's just like, ding dong, okay. Now, don't get me wrong, she's not unintelligent. She just chooses to always hope for the best in people. It was so encouraging. I hope she's still the same way, because life has an opportunity to steal that away. So I hope she still is. But she was so different. And to an extent, it was just fun. I have 40 people, most of them unsaved. They just like to deal with Jessica. Sometimes it's funny. My boys are older now, Lorraine, but when they were in the house, they had what was called Dad's World. I used Dad's world. You know, like if I didn't want to go to the store, then if I didn't want, they were all driving. So if I didn't want to go to the store to get like the one thing at 9 o'clock at night, I'd be like, no, you know. It had to be 8:30 because they close at 9. If I didn't want to go to the store at 8:30, it would be, you know, I can't go up there. All those young cashiers, I get up there and they just flirt with me and I just feel so awkward. Yeah, you know what world that's true in. Dad's world. Or sometimes I tell them, you know, what happened, and I'll be like, oh, I was just getting so grouchy. It was hard for me to deal with, you know, and Josh especially just be like, yeah, only in Dad's world are you still 30 and bench 350. You're old, Dad. You're old. Oh, well. Josh, for all those times you said that to me, last night I was listening. Josh's world now. And Katie's working. Katie's going to school. She's taking some chemistry classes, which aren't easy for her. You know, if she says she's doing fine, she's deceiving herself, and the truth's not in her. She's struggling. And she tries to please everybody. And it seems like, you know, here's her problem. There's always somebody on the other phone wanting me to go spend time with them. There's always, yesterday there were two people, you know, families saying, can you come and see us? I'm doing homework. What am I going to tell them? And she's so then she's over there and she's trying to convince herself that her life isn't so rough. I've got all these problems and, okay, life isn't so rough. Josh, of course not. You're married to me. Only true in Josh's world. The hardest part of her life, son, is that she's married to you. But on a certain level, this not seeing the truth, it can be fun, especially if we know it's a joke. But let me tell you, if what you don't see is your controlling, angry, selfish, arrogant personality, if you don't see that you would rather live in the dark about those destructive personality, active types, let me tell you, you're going to be full of rationalization and explanations and blaming and pointing of fingers for everything. And you will be around your loved ones and not have an idea at all of how much your controlling, angry, selfish behavior affects them. In fact, when they try to protest, because that's what it feels like when you're on the abused side. They would say, well, when I try to talk to you about the truth in love, what usually happens is now, because you think so much, you've deceived yourself so much that they are actually the problem, the bully begins to cry, why are you always picking on me? You blame me for everything. And there is no change because we would rather live in the dark about what is true about ourselves. It is scary. Living in the dark is destructive. But if we ask anybody, when our brother Nate is on there, what he would say, take over a whole Sunday school class. Rather live in the dark or live in the light? Okay, well, let's make it easier. If you could start all over from the beginning and live in the light or live in the dark, every person would say, well, I'd rather live in the light. If I'm starting over, you mean I don't even have to acknowledge all of those challenges and problems and I could just start over? Of course, I want to live in the light. You see, because the light is beautiful, it enables me to see. And that's what it does. Sometimes it enables me to see beautiful things like good and noble and virtue. It enables me to see. So when I see these good things, I can choose them. Ultimately, that's why we got saved. God revealed himself. We saw the beauty that is God. We saw his love for us. We saw his forgiveness for us. And we were able to choose. So hopefully why we get married. But Hank, hopefully that's why you got married. You and Miss Debbie were dating, and you got to see who she is. You got to see the beauty that Miss Debbie is, and you got to choose her. Wouldn't it be terrible if you never really got to see who she was because she was putting on the whole time. But our God doesn't do that. He's light. In him is no darkness at all. Like, she's just putting on a front because she wants me for my money. Oh, no, that would be Hank's world. Only in Hank's world. Light doesn't always just it doesn't always just reveal the beautiful things. Sometimes it reveals the negative, ugly, dangerous things. So I can avoid them. If it wasn't for light, we'd step in holes, we'd fall off cliffs, we'd walk into walls, we couldn't accomplish anything. So we've talked about this before. But sometimes, and this is just trying to be reality, talk about, if all this is true and we know it, why do we struggle so much with walking in the light? Why do we struggle so much with looking like our Savior? Because Justin, sometimes the revealing power of light, which I love, is also the reason I avoid the light. Because what it reveals is the truth about me. It exposes my sin, my agenda, my anger, my contempt. And I don't want to see it. Sometimes I even get upset about the person who turned the light on. Which is why we don't like you. Because I'm totally happy with my attitude and my anger and my parenting and my addiction and my need to control things with just leave the light off. Or at least that's what I convince myself until I get alone. I'm so depressed. But I'm not changing a thing because I like it just the way it is. This is the way the Pharisees liked it too. John chapter 9, and we can go to multiple places. But really, you break it. Oh, I gave you this. 3 verses. And Jesus said, for judgment I come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. So the Pharisees said, hey, are you talking about me? And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, are we blind? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. Justin, over and over and over again, this is what he says. He says, you think you're wise. You think you're righteous. You think your way is the right way. You refuse to repent. You refuse to humble yourself. You're hypocrites. You're blind guides because you're living away from the light. You're living in the vanity of your own mind. You're making up your own decisions. You've created your own way. You can't claim truth. And when the light shines, let me tell you something else light does. There's coming a day where the light's going to burn things up. We can learn to walk in the light and fellowship in the light, or the light will destroy. Wood, hay, stubble, it's all going to burn. People can get so deceived. We can get to the place that we, like the Pharisees, claim truth. And we make right wrong, and we make dark light, and we make light dark. And they hated the light. They wanted to crucify the light. The light came and was among them, and they hated him. We can get to the place where we're so deceived. This comes from the book Divine Conspiracy, but since I've actually done some reading on it, Ben, I meant to talk to you about this, but I don't think I ever have. In the beginning of the book Divine Conspiracy, he writes about one of the problems that the World War II fighter pilots had. And that is, they could all fly fine during the day, but they weren't exactly supposed to be flying at night. They were 23, 24 years old. And they would get so disoriented that at night, they would be flying upside down and not know it. Now, Justin, when I read that, flying upside down, how can you not know it? But that's where they would try to teach them to trust their instruments. And sometimes they wouldn't trust their instruments, and so when they thought they were pulling upside down, you'd be taking the plane down, and it would take it straight to a crash. I forget when it was, but do you remember when John F. K. crashed the plane? That basically is what they think happened. He wasn't supposed to be flying at night. He got so disoriented, and it was pilot error. He took that plane with his wife and sister-in-law, and stuck it straight into the water. He pulled this stick and kept trying to get up. He didn't trust his instruments, and he crashed it. And Justin, that's what we can do in our life. We can get so disoriented, up, wrong, right. We can get so disillusioned that we'll, it happens at home, okay? So my anger and my control and my selfishness, they're the problems. Well, you know what I do to fix it? I become angrier and more controlling, and I just keep pulling it straight down. Oh, we got 3 minutes, so I need to just... So what can we do? Well, last week we talked about a couple things. Well, first, we need to quit lying about our lying. It is a problem. I'm good, I don't lie. We need to quit lying about deception. We all struggle with deception. We need to admit it. And in order to, once we admit it, we need to quit it. And Brother Maury, that requires us asking some questions about, like, maybe why? Why did I lie? So why does that matter? Well, because when I say, why did I lie, it shows the root cause. The action was the deception, but the real reason was because I wanted to protect myself, or I wanted to control you, or I wanted to be viewed a certain way, or I was fearful of the repercussions. Those are the things I've got to start to change. Faith deals with most of them, by the way, faith in a loving God. And then 3, we need to invest in truth. We invest in reading and praying and actually, choosing the action. I didn't say this last week, but throw this out there. Maybe one of the things you might want to do is ask someone who's really close to you, how do you see me? Don't be surprised if they don't want to answer. By that fear, it tells you something. It tells you how they see you if they're afraid to answer the question. Tiptoe around. But if we'll start moving and living in the light, I can give you a couple promises. 1, if we begin to tell the truth about our anger, our deceiving, our issues, if we drag it out into the light, that's where Jesus lives, in the light. And not just bring it out there for others to carry and we continue in it. Promise this, we will find freedom, we will feel clean, we will know forgiveness, and we will experience grace. A few verses later in this 1 John chapter, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us. And when you're dirty and in the dark and hiding, freedom and grace and restoration. Or do you want to live in the light? Eric, I don't know did I give you Psalm 32? Here's the thing about living in the dark. Sometimes we think it's good, but it's harder than living in the light. David said, when I kept silent, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the days long. For day and night, thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is turned into the drought of summer. I can't even cry anymore. There's nothing left up here. You will find freedom. 2, you'll have some new friends. 1 John 1:7. But we'll now have fellowship. We kind of think we have friends, but if you're living in the darkness, Ben, if you're living in the darkness, you got no friends. Well, you got no real relationship. Nobody knows you. You got one lie after another lie after another. They like all those. You never feel comfortable. You can never know somebody's shoes. You never know anything. It's just deception. But you start living in the light. We'll have fellowship one with another. People living in the light. And 3, and this goes back to our passage there in Ephesians. We will be protected. Why? Because we will start to gird ourselves up with the armor of God in his power and in his strength. But Doug, you close in a word of prayer this morning.